I'll just sort of deal with that first, because it's not the topic of what I want to talk about today, but I just want to say about public sector pensions that it is not the position of ATL or of any of the teacher unions that nothing must change. We need three things. We need a valuation of our scheme, which is 2 years overdue. We need information, which the government now has for 6 months consistently refused to give us. And we need negotiation. If the cost ceiling, which the government gives us at the end of this month, simply incorporates a 3.5% rise in contributions, a rise in the pension age, the career averaging scheme, if it just simply incorporates everything the government wants, and then they give us the cost ceiling, that's not negotiation. We really need real negotiation. And we need government assumptions which have some basis in reality. The assumptions they're putting about life expectancy, about teachers' rises, the wage rises each year, the expectations they're putting in about inflation, which will never exceed 2% a year, they might as well say that we'll win the World Cup and the summer will always be hot. So we need proper negotiation, we need information, we need valuation, but that's not what I want to talk about today, because I think the last speaker, actually it's a very good introduction to what I want to say. The focus on public sector pensions has taken the spotlight off private sector pensions, and it is simply not true that the former are a problem and the latter are not. It's not true that private sector pensions are all right, and in fact when government ministers on the 30th of June dropped the arguments on affordability and disappeared off the television screen, and actually then started about fairness, and it's not fair that the private sector taxpayer pays for the public sector pension when public sector workers are taxpayers, that's simply not true. And there's some figures which bear this out. Did you know that in 2007 to 2008, which is the last year for which figures are available, more government money in the form of tax relief was spent and given to corporations and individuals in private sector pensions than was actually spent out by those companies in pensions? 37.5 billion was given in the form of indirect tax relief and subsidies to private sector pensions, to companies and individuals. And in that year, just for a contrast, 25 billion was paid out in public sector pensions. Now, to put this in some perspective, a pension subsidy, which it is, of 37.5 billion to the private sector is almost exactly the same as the defence budget, and questions have to be asked, therefore, if this sum is justified. Particularly when, the question has to be asked, particularly when nearly all of the investment in private sector pension funds does nothing to help the UK economy. 99% of all investment in private sector pension funds is at best what's called second-hand shares or bonds already in issue. And so after the first purchase, not one bit of the money which is spent buying and selling shares, which give the funds for the private sector pension funds, goes to help the company who issued the shares in the first place. All of it goes to the previous owner, which may of course be a pension fund, but the point is none of this speculative activity does anything in any way to help the productive economy. Now, Richard Murphy, I don't know if you've seen the pamphlet, he produced it last year, in his pamphlet Making Pensions Work, he advocates two fundamental reforms of the private sector pension industry which I think are really worth examining if we're going to answer the question who pays in later life. He argues, first of all, that if tax relief is going to be given to pension fund contributions, then there must be conditions attached for doing so. And a significant part of those pension fund contributions, he suggests at least 25%, must be used proactively to create new capital assets, new infrastructure, new skills and new jobs. And in addition, pension funds must be required to invest for the long term and to minimise the transaction costs at present paid every time a stock or a bond is bought or sold. And that would mean that funds will be required by law to invest strategically as business partners and not merely speculate for short-term gain, a role that is in any case and inevitably in conflict with their long-term duty to produce returns for their members. And if they don't want to do this, if a pension fund, a private pension fund, says we don't want that stricture, well, that's fine, but they don't get the subsidies, and neither does anyone who invests in them get the subsidy. We're giving this tax relief, it's taxpayers' relief. We have a right to expect these firms to do something for the economy with it. Pension funds also must be much more transparent and accountable to their investors. They must produce accounts which are comprehensible to a layperson, and they must apply them to all their members, and in them they must detail their investment strategy. We've heard about Nest and this time's short, so I'll say just one final thing. In these two ways, they're just two ideas, but in these two ways, the compact that underpins pensions, which is a compact between older and younger generations, will be honoured in a way that is being breached at the present. And the contract is this, that the older generation, through its own efforts, creates capital assets and infrastructure in both the state and the private sectors, which the following younger generation can use in their work. And in exchange, the succeeding younger generation will, through their work, meet the needs of the older generation in retirement. This is not a compact that the current system even recognises, and that is one of the very many reasons why it's in crisis.